Beautiful afternoon, evening here in Louisville, here on the campus of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And for those who are online, welcome and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Andrew Pomerville. I'm the president here at Louisville Seminary, and I am so happy to see how many of us are here for this wonderful conversation. Yeah, I like the energy. We have had a tremendous start to our Mosaic Symposium, and I expect that tonight will be yet another highlight to the week. We have been engaging in an outstanding conversation together, but let us pause before we begin. Let us have a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving, not just for the conversation we're about to have, but for the opportunity to have conversations like this. Be thankful for the people around us, for the chance for us to think together, to wonder together, and to be motivated and think about what comes next, not just as a seminary community, but all of our friends at the seminary who are here with us and those who are online, and for where we are called to go next after this night. I'd invite you, as you feel comfortable and led, to join me in prayer. Gracious and almighty God, we are thankful that we have the chance not just to be neighbors with one another, but to recognize our neighbors. You call us to love one another. Therefore, Lord, help us look around and realize that we get to be with one another. Thank you for giving us the chance to build community, online, face-to-face, here in Kentucky, around our country, in our world. Let us never grow tired of practicing love, graciousness, hospitality, peace, and welcome. In this space, and in this place, we are grateful that we have the opportunity to be here and to be together. Therefore, bless the time that we have and help us be full of love and grace in the way that we communicate. Through your Holy Spirit we pray. Amen. The Caldwell Lectures honor former Louisville Seminary president Frank H. Caldwell, who served from 1930 to 1964. Dr. Caldwell was professor of homiletics during his time at the seminary, in addition to serving as president from 1936 to 1964. He also served as the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in the United States in 1966 after retiring from the seminary. In addition to the Caldwell Lectures, a professorship in homiletics has been endowed in his name at the seminary, and that endowed professorship is held by our Vice President for Academics, the Dean of the Seminary, and the Frank H. Caldwell Professor of Homiletics, and my friend, Dr. Deborah Mumford, who I would like to welcome to provide our introduction for tonight. Dean Mumford.
Good evening. Thank you, President Pomerville. I appreciate the introduction and this time that we have together. I'm excited to introduce our speakers for the evening. Reverend Cassidy Hall is an author, award-winning filmmaker, podcaster, and leading voice in contemplative spirituality. She's the co-host of the Encountering Silence podcast and the creator of Contemplating Now and Queering Contemplation podcast. Her films include In Pursuit of Silence and Day of a Stranger. Her book, Queering Contemplation, Finding Queerness in the Roots and Future of Contemplative Spirituality, was released in May of 2024. Reverend Hall is widely published and resides in Indianapolis, where she is studying for her Doctor of Ministry degree. Reverend Hall is ordained in the United Church of Christ and serves as Director of Communications for the Heartland and Indiana-Kentucky conferences, overseeing communications needs for hundreds of churches in Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, and Indiana. She earned her Master of Divinity and Master of Theological Studies degrees from Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. We won't hold that against her, it's okay. Reverend Hall has chosen to offer her thoughts and gifts for us tonight in an interview format rather than a traditional lecture. She will be in conversation with Jessica Mesman. Jessica Mesman is the senior editor of the Christian Century magazine. You see some of those magazines on your tables there. And a widely published writer whose work has been noted in Best American Essays. Currently, her work is taking her deeper into folk religion, horror stories, we have to ask you more about that, and the historical overlap between the occult and traditional Christian practices. Her next book, Memento Mori, Horror as a Spiritual Practice, is forthcoming from Erdman's Press. During this interview entitled Queering the Neighborhood, Reverend Hall will speak about what it means to queer our practice and presence in the midst of such a divided world. Drawing from personal stories and spiritual experience, she will explore how her own queerness has enlivened her contemplative practice and everyday presence. After the interview, we will take about 15 to 20 minutes or so for questions and answers. So let us welcome Reverend Cassidy Hall and Jessica Mesman.
Can you hear me, everybody? Check, check, can you hear me? Thank you so much for having us, especially for having me as Cassidy's guest and your guest today. I'm going to start with a quote from Thomas Merton. I believe this is our first slide, too.
That's me.
Okay. Thomas Merton, the Catholic Trappist monk and author who lived near here, south of here at Gethsemane Abbey. His essay, Integrity, is a favorite of both Cassidy and mine, and it will serve as a kind of roadmap for our conversation today. Many poets are not poets for the same reason that many religious people are not saints. They never succeed in being themselves. They never become the person or the artist who is called for by all the circumstances of their individual lives. They waste their years in vain efforts to be some other poet, some other saint. They wear out their minds and bodies in a hopeless endeavor to have somebody else's experiences or write somebody else's poems. So I've been a writer, a religion writer and an editor for lots of publications for the last 25 years, and I'm now an editor at the Christian Century, which I've left some copies on the table. If you're not familiar with us, we're an ecumenical theological journal based in Chicago. We've been around over 100 years. We consider ourselves a bridge between the seminary, the academy, and the church. Cassidy is a contributing writer there, and I'm her editor. We've been working together in lots of different capacities for over a decade now. And over that time, I've watched her live into her vocation and find her voice as a scholar and a spiritual writer. And I know she will cringe when I say this, but I see the work she's doing now, including writing her book, Queering Contemplation, as really fully living into who she is called to be, as Merton was describing it in Integrity. But it's been a real journey for her to get to this point, and that's what we want to share with you today. So I'm hoping she can talk to us about how she came to honor her own intuition and experiences, even when they didn't and still don't quite fit with established narratives. I think we both can recognize that leaning into the ways that we don't seem to fit and all the ways that we have to push against the norm can really be the key to unlocking the work you're here to do in the world. So we're going to start at the beginning. Cassidy, were you brought up in the church?
I grew up in the Methodist Church, and that quickly drifted into going to church on Christmas and Easter, like many of us, right? But something really, really unique in my family. I'm the youngest of 4 children, and something really unique happened for all of us when we got to middle school. My parents gave us a choice, and as soon as we got to middle school, they basically came to each of us and said, okay, church is your choice now. If you want to go, we'll give you a ride, we'll take your friends, wherever you want to go. But it's now your choice. You now have the abilities and the autonomy to choose for yourself. Well, unfortunately, that led me to an evangelical youth group for a while. So let's be honest.
Oops.
And, oopsie. And I was in that for a while, but interestingly, for the first couple years, so this is like middle school, the first couple years of that, I was just a total skeptic. And for many of my friends, I was like their conversion project, right? You know, because I was asking all these questions and they just wanted me to do the altar call thing and make it happen. Well, at one youth conference, the altar call happened and I ended up doing it, and I went up and, you know, prayed the prayer, whatever you do. And then I came back to my seat, and again, I'm in middle school, and the first thing I said, and I said this out loud, was, what did I just do? Why did I just do that? And my youth leader at the time immediately said to me, your questions are of the devil. And something in my little middle school brain knew that wasn't true. Thank God. Something in my brain knew that wasn't true, that I was feeling something different, that I was okay with the not knowing, okay with the questions. I don't know.
Yeah. That's so interesting to me, because the idea that your parents trusted you at that young age and gave you that kind of autonomy to make your own decisions about your faith life, and the church that you went to wanted to take that away from you. I feel like that was a real gift that your parents gave you, to have that freedom and confidence to trust your own intuition and to question authority. You were allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So many of us did not have that growing up, right? And I didn't. I definitely didn't. And then to be told that your intuition was satanic, just horrifying. No wonder you felt like, wow, something's really not right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you stayed. You stayed in evangelical spaces for years.
Yeah.
So when did you finally know that you had to move on?
Yeah. Well, it's time to get a little queer here. And, you know, I was secretly dating women. So in college, I began secretly dating women. So that's one reason of, clearly this is not going to be a sustainable place for me. So
Good indicator.
Yeah. I also realized, again, like going back to that feeling as a middle schooler, I also realized I was surrounded by fear, and I was also living in this fear. I was living in a culture of certitude and answers guided by fear. And it just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And I realized that my faith experience was one that was okay with questions, and one that welcomed questions, and one that welcomed the unknowing, the paradoxes, the tensions. And so eventually I kind of just found my way slowly out, recognizing both that I don't belong, I don't fit, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to.
Yeah. So you began deconstructing.
Yeah.
And working your way out of that fear-based theology. Part of that was accepting your sexuality as something you no longer wanted to hide.
Yeah.
Or deny. So what did that look like? What did that deconstruction look like? Did you keep going to church? Did you find a new church? Did you walk away from church for a while?
Yeah, I'm incredibly lucky, because I think for a lot of us, that deconstruction, when we're so harmed by the church, we need to step away from the church and from God. For some reason, I was really able to parse out that the problems were essentially what was happening with the people and not with God. And so I never felt like I had to detach from God. I never felt like I had to detach from the divine and my experience or that relationship. And I realized that's not an experience everyone has.
Yeah, it was not my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at that time, I really found myself, again, basking in the questions, basking in the unknowing, but really feeling safe there. And at that time, I came across the Episcopal Church and was really drawn to the rhythms and the ritual, and felt that was kind of this holding place for me to continue to question, to continue to be curious. and yet also to not be forced into something that I don't belong in, whether it was an identity, a script for my life, a normative that I was expected to be or to do. So a few years later, I started working as a counselor in Iowa, and I was working in a community agency, and I was, the whole thing, overworked and working long days and just really challenging, always behind on paperwork, all this. And at that job, I started having panic attacks. And for those of us who have had a panic attack, you know how terrifying they are. For those of us who have had panic attacks, we know the very first one is horrifying, not to minimize any of them thereafter. But it was very clear to me something needed to change. Something was not right. Something in me was kind of stuck inside myself at this job I was at. Again, I was at this kind of, I guess, I was doing what I thought was the script for my life. You go get this salary job that has benefits, whether you like it or not, you stay because it's secure, right? And at that time, I was also reading Thomas Merton's New Seeds of Contemplation in between clients. And literally every second I got, I would go to my desk and just start reading something. And that's when I came across this essay titled Integrity. And that line, many poets are not poets for the same reason many religious people are not saints. They never succeed in being themselves. Specifically that part, they never succeed in being themselves. That line rang in my body like a call to prayer that I couldn't understand, but I knew it meant something for my life. I was out as a queer woman and, living out and happy and all of that, but there was something again that was in me that wasn't fully living into all of myself. Was I living someone else's stories? Was I trying to be some other person, some other, poet? So I decided to get weird, and I was like, I guess I should go to this monastery where this guy was and check out where he wrote these words. Sure, he died in 1968, but what's resonating with me? What is this that makes sense to me? So I went to Gethsemane Abbey and just fell in love with the silence, the solitude, the spaciousness, the contemplative rhythms, and ended up going back to my job, putting in my 30-day notice, and traveling to all 17 of these Trappist monasteries in the U.S., which is kind of insane. But and also in that I have no Catholic background. I had no intention of becoming a monk or a nun, and I only knew that something about this contemplative spaciousness resonated with me, that was finally something that clicked with me spiritually. I was really meeting something of the divine for the first time. And on these travels, I remember multiple occasions just saying to God, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing the right thing. And there's a great Merton prayer I'm thinking right now about that, where it begins, my Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I cannot see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. But I do know that my desire to please you is in fact, I'm sure Mark Mead could finish this for me.
Does in fact please you.
Yeah. But there was something about these spaces, right? These monastic spaces, very non-normative, very strange in the world to choose to live in this communal togetherness, to live and work, pray and work together. And I was also really drawn to the weirdness of the monastery and the oddness, the strangeness of it all. And yet this very, again, non-normative, but also very communal. Yet eventually, by the end of this trip, I was able to recognize, okay, these are also very homogeneous spaces, primarily white, you know, also a lot of just similar experiences where I didn't see my own queerness. I didn't see a variety of other marginalized experiences. And so that's when another tension began to kind of build in me.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, that is what brought us together professionally, that moment for you of feeling that restricted in Catholic spaces. I am a Catholic.
Yeah.
In fact, you sent me that prayer card. As one of the first things you sent me was the Thomas Merton prayer, and I had it taped above my computer at the time too.
Yeah.
So, we were both pushing against the norms of the spaces we were working in at the time. For me, I was a Catholic writer, and I was newly divorced, and my whole career was in Catholic publishing, but I no longer checked all the boxes that really are required for a woman to check to be a public Catholic, and that was tricky for a long time. So I was looking around for new models for writers and thinkers that could be guides to me through this time of my life, and honestly, there just weren't many, if there were any at all. So I thought, well, I guess I gotta do it myself. I guess I gotta start writing some stuff, and writing openly about my own experiences. And that meant rethinking my career in a lot of ways. But creatively, it was one of the most fruitful times of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like so many of us, I would actually argue by the nature of the church being an institution, it has created norms and expectations for all of us, no matter what church we're in, no matter what church we're a part of, no matter what denomination. And I think in some way, all of us have to push up against these norms, regardless of our identity or storyline or expectations that were given to us. These life scripts, right? You do this at this age. You know, all these scripts and storylines. And I think that by the nature of life and by the nature of churches we belong to, we almost have to push up against these norms and scripts. And also, you said it was one of the most fruitful times of your life when you did that.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's only when we do push up against these, when we finally break through or find ourselves or get to who we are. And another Merton quote I'm thinking of is, "For me to be a saint means to be myself. Therefore, the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and of discovering my true self." Mm-hmm. And so, while there's a lot here about creativity, it's also about holiness.
Yeah.
It's also about being true to the image that we are made in. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I also think about that Howard Thurman quote where he says, you know, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And I think what we're saying to that is also the world needs people who are themselves.
Truly themselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that so much. And I love this idea that creativity and holiness are entwined. I feel like holiness is like not a popular word anymore. It's a scary word. But I love thinking of it in this way, that accepting this creative tension and the call to work within these tensions that we all hold within us and in our communities, that's the actual path to holiness and sainthood.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I did that, it was not just a fertile creative time, it was a fertile spiritual time. I don't think I ever felt as inspired as I had at the time, or as moved by spiritual experience when I was doing that work. And just to clarify, when I say creative, I don't mean like making art even, or writing books. I mean that space where our particularities, and each of us created in the image of the divine has that particularity, and that's going to butt up against the norms at some point. And that's when you're most creative. That's when you're breaking new ground. That's the sacred work. That's the spiritual path.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because sometimes when people hear the word creativity or artist, they think it's not for them, or we think it's not for us. But it's something that belongs to all of us, right? Like sometimes we talk about being co-creators with the divine. We talk about the ways that our lives are co-creating with spirit. And each of us brings a uniqueness that widens the incarnation, right? That gives the gift of more of the divine when we remain true to who we are. And we were also very excited earlier today to see some art by Sister Karita Kent, whom I love. And
you've got original Karitas here.
Yeah, those were great, you guys.
So exciting.
And reminds me of this quote where she says, "Creativity belongs to the artist in each of us. To create means to relate. The root meaning of the word art is to fit together. And we do this every day. Not all of us are painters, but we are all artists. Each time we fit things together, we are creating, whether it's to make a loaf of bread, a child, a day."
I love that. I had never heard that, the root meaning of the word art is to fit together. And it made me think of the root meaning of the word religion, to bind or connect. I'm sure we all know that. But the idea that those two are related even in etymology is kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something that's invitational there about again, breaking these boundaries, these binaries, these boxes, these categories that church gives us, or that these norms ask us to do.
Yeah, and then fitting them back together in new ways.
Right. In ways that make sense for our lives.
Yeah, infinitely new ways.
Yeah. You know, in this tension, we're also talking about this tension, right? This tension of what to do when we don't fit, but also knowing that these parts are a part of us, right? Like this creative part of me, I want to create a union with this part of me that is in love with the divine. And that tension's kind of been a part of my spiritual life for as long as I can remember. I started having dreams about death at the age of 8, where I was just floating in nothingness and white space and no time, and no one was there. It was horrifying. And I was flooded with questions, and questions that no one could really answer, which I appreciated that no one tried to give me an answer that they didn't know.
Yes. Again, props to your parents.
Props to my parents.
Dick and Rena Hall.
Yeah, shout out. And I think this was this creative tension in particular, I think, is what led me to seminary in 2018. And I knew I wasn't going for answers, but I also knew something was missing from any answers I had received up until this time.
Yeah. I remember you were doing a lot of work on Merton at this time. You had finished your 17 monastery tour. You were making a film about his time in his hermitage at the Abbey of Gethsemane. So tell everybody a little bit about the film you made, Day of a Stranger, and what you learned making that film.
Yeah, so Day of a Stranger is a 30-minute short meditative documentary exploring Thomas Merton's hermitage years, where he lived from 1965 until his death in 1968. And on many trips to the Thomas Merton Center at Bellarmine University, I got to work with my friend Mark Mead, shout out, and was able to kind of go through some of the audio that he recorded in the hermitage space alone, which I was fascinated by, because it's very random, like stream of consciousness, and sometimes he's just reading his own journal, reading a book review. It was very interesting.
Reading the newspaper even? Or something at some points? Yeah.
It was all very fascinating. It was very unlike some of the audio that I had heard of him maybe talking, leading a talk for novices, or where he's kind of more like presentation Merton.
Right. He got to see the private.
He was not
Merton.
buttoned up. He was kind of this guy hanging out home alone and being like, how does this tape work, and this is fun. I guess I'll talk about this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one audio where he kind of says, well, you got to keep talking when the tape is rolling, and what are you going to say? And you just, very fascinating.
This is really human.
Yeah, very human. Yeah, and making that became for me kind of a contemplative and meditative experience. And I had been in seminary for a couple years at this point, and I was showing the film in various places, and I kept getting this question. And the question was, what do we do to make sure people don't forget Thomas Merton? How do we make sure he doesn't get lost? How do we make sure younger generations remember him or don't forget him? And I had heard this so many times that at one of the last times I showed the film, I simply just said, what's so wrong with forgetting Thomas Merton? What's so wrong with letting him go?
Oopsie.
Oops.
And that was a bit controversial.
Yeah.
It kind of landed like a lead balloon with some people.
Yeah.
But I, as your editor at the time at the Century, was like, that's the essay I want from Cassidy Hall. That's the essay I want to read. So like not another tribute or memorial or why we need to recover Thomas Merton, who was never lost.
Yeah.
But an honest exploration of where Merton has both influenced you, which is undeniable, and where he has fallen short.
And boy, has he fallen short.
Yeah.
So a couple years prior to that, I was at a Toronto bookstore, and I was there with my friend Jim Forrest, who's a peace activist, and he was giving a talk there. And I was going on a walk, and I went into a bookstore and saw a book of letters between Thomas Merton and friends, and thought, oh, I'll flip through this and see if Jim Forrest's letters are in here. And so I was looking for his last name, Forrest, in the index, and then immediately saw the word homosexuality. And I was kind of like, what? Merton never wrote about this. What is this? What could this be? And so I flipped to this letter, which I believe is titled something like Letter to an Unidentified Friend or Unknown Friend. And basically, some of the things in this letter include homosexuality is sin, and maybe psychiatric help would be of use. So this was horrifying. And you know, so I grappled with this for a while. I started talking to people about it, and everything I heard was, well, he was a man of his time. Well, he was a product of the Catholic Church. Well, you know, all these excuses. And I was just kind of like, what if he's just wrong? It's okay.
I love that. It's quite possible he was just wrong.
He's just wrong.
Yeah. So simple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what if he would be also okay being corrected?
Yeah.
Or, you know, I mean, what if he can just be wrong? I think we do a disservice. I think we do a disservice actually to our spiritual teachers when we put them on such high pedestal that we're not willing to question them. We're not willing to wrestle with them. And I think that that's such a crucial part of navigating our own faith journey, finding our own voice.
Yeah, I mean, that comes right back to you being told your questions were satanic.
Yeah.
Of the devil. And it's kind of the same message. Like, how dare you question Thomas Merton at this point in your career?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so at that point, so this is about 2 years prior to this, showing the film more, I kind of started to realize, okay, so Merton is a voice in the status quo, and I have to accept that. He is a white, cisgender, straight, presumably celibate man. And his life is very different from mine. He doesn't know what it's like to be a queer woman. He doesn't know what it's like to be other folks on the margins. He doesn't know what it's like to be, you know, facing the challenges that we're facing in our lives today.
Right.
And so I had been in seminary at this point for a year or so, and I was hearing from some really powerful voices, womanist theologians, Asian feminist theologians, queer theologians, disability theologies, liberation theologies, and others on the margins whose voices were inspiring me, challenging me, and encouraging me to question. But I think the most critical invitation I got, and if it's the only thing I got from seminary, but I did get other things, I promise. But if it's the only thing I got, it was worth every second. And that was learning from womanist theologians and womanist scholars who challenged me to begin asking, both in the biblical text and in my life, who is missing?
Yeah.
What voices are missing? What bodies are missing? What identities are missing? What stories are missing?
Yeah.
And I had to accept that in the context of what I was navigating, that included my own voice as a queer woman.
Yeah.
So yeah, that goes back to, I mean, I think Merton would be fine being corrected. You know, I think Merton himself said in his final lecture in Thailand just before he died, he actually kind of, it was the end of his lecture, and he said, we're going to have the questions tonight. Now I will disappear, which is interesting because it's like the last recorded thing he said. And I love thinking about that as this, it was a silly line at the end of his talk on Eastern and Western monasticism, but I like thinking about it as kind of like this prophetic thing, like what if I'm disappearing? What if it's time for me to pass the torch? What if it's time for us to look to other voices? And he looked to other voices throughout his life, which is so crucial. I mean, he wrote with folks from all different religions, and he elevated and honored these voices by writing about them. I'm thinking D.T. Suzuki, he talked with folks about Zen Buddhism. He talked with Rachel Carson about ecological justice. He apparently wrote James Baldwin, unclear if it got to him, this letter ever went out, but after he read The Fire Next Time, I believe. And so there's all these, Abraham Joshua Heschel, I mean, we could go on and on and on about his correspondences and his value of this interfaith dialogue and these conversations.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, I think we just do a disservice to ourselves and everyone if we don't take folks off the pedestal and say, let's correct them.
I think you have to respect your spiritual mentors and heroes enough to wrestle with them.
Yeah.
That's taking their thoughts seriously.
Yeah.
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 So I remember, as your editor, urging you to be really honest in this essay that you were writing. I think we have a slide. Yeah, there it is. About your frustration, which you had told me about, with contemplative studies being dominated by voices of white cis men. I remember very gently asking you where your voice was in your current project, and that essay is this one. You can read it online at the Century now. It's in a back issue. And we ended up calling it Maybe It's Time for Me to Let Go of Thomas Merton. And this became the seed for your podcast and your book, Queer in Contemplation, in which you tell your own story, finally, and shine a light on the work of many other queer, womanist, liberation theologians, activists working in contemplative studies. So tell us a little bit more about the book.
Yeah. I was going to say something else about this. Oh, I kind of like that some people reference this as my breakup letter with Thomas Merton.
Yeah.
Why
I had to break up with Thomas Merton.
Yeah. Which is funny because clearly I'm not going to date him because I'm not interested in men, but anyway. I had to recognize I also came to writing the book and doing this work from a place of privilege. I am still a white woman in America. And my queer identity is only one queer identity. You ask anyone in the LGBTQIA+ community what's that identity means to them, and you're going to get all different answers. And that is the beauty of it, right? Again, that is more of the incarnation. That is the widening incarnation in our midst, when we get to see more of each other and more of the uniqueness of each other. So because I was reminded by Womanist scholars to ask who's missing, it was really important for me to include other voices in the book and also in my interviews on the podcast. And so, you know, some of those identities were, I interviewed a trans Latina woman, a Black lesbian woman, a bisexual Korean American, and other identities and experiences that I cannot speak to. And to me, it was crucial to not have, because my book still could have been very homogenous and very boring, to be honest with you, plain. And I think the beauty of being able to hear from more voices in that was just to be able to learn from other queer experiences. I learned so much while writing that book.
Yeah, I think you wanted to broaden the experience, the field, so writing a book yourself wasn't going to accomplish that, just telling your one story.
Yeah.
Though I think it's important that you told that story in those pages. But giving the mic basically to other scholars, giving them a platform was part of the aim of the book, right?
Yeah, and challenging my own lack of knowledge of other experiences. So I had a few folks read the transcripts before it was published for like a sensitivity read, because, you know, I don't have a non-binary or trans experience, for instance, and so there were some sections where that was so crucial for me to include in the book, but how do I include it in a way that is honoring to that experience? You know, obviously including those voices, using quotes from folks with that experience, but also doing it in a way that is honoring, that is not me speaking for someone else.
Right. So talk a little bit about your use of the word queer.
Yeah, so I like to use queer in a really fun way. So in my book, I say that queer is the way I tilt my head to look at the world. And so for me, queer is not just, for me, queer is not just related to my sexuality, but it's also related to looking at the world differently, to seeing with your head tilted, to look sideways, to look upside down, to see through things, and to be able to use your imagination to break through the norms, to subvert the norms that harm us, to move towards liberation. And the etymological roots of the word queer come from 16th century Scots, and that's when the word meant things like odd, strange, oblique, transverse. So it wouldn't be until the late 19th century when queer began to reference sexuality in a derogatory manner. So I love saying that just because I like thinking about the majority of the life of the word actually meant things like strange, oblique, transverse. And to me also that calls forth the trickster image, right? And kind of the ways in which I think queerness can be kind of a trickster in a normative society. And I'm really enjoying writing about that right now, actually.
That's in the next book.
The next one. So the word's reclamation, as we know, because obviously queer has caused a lot of harm. It's hurt a lot of people, and I want to name that and honor that. And then in the 1980s, the word was reclaimed as a word of pride, and this is when movements and activists adopted the word as kind of a stance. And by the late 1990s, we start learning about queer theory, and we began using it as a means to examine the world in new ways, disentangled from norms and assumptions, particularly related to gender and sexuality. So I, again, love hearing the different ways in which people define queer and express queer. And so one of my favorite ways comes from Black Canadian poet Brandon Went. Oh, that's my book. And this comes from Sonia Renee Taylor's book, The Body is Not an Apology. And in that book, she quotes Brandon Wint, who says, not queer like gay, queer like escaping definition, queer like some sort of fluidity and limitlessness at once, queer like a freedom too strange to be conquered, queer like the fearlessness to imagine what love can look like and pursue it. And then another quote that I really appreciate, well, back to the Brandon Wint quote, I love the way that he kind of reminds us that queerness invites us to see differently, and again, to see beyond the normative or the expectation. And Reverend Dr. Pamela Lightsey, who wrote Our Lives Matter, A Queer Womanist Theology, excellent book if you haven't read it, she says that to say that I'm queer is not only my self-identity, but it is also my active engagement against heteronormativity. So against the forces of domination that harm us, against these forces of domination that give us these norms, these expectations. And I think that any kind of norm or normativity is a tool of empire, is a tool of harm, because it forces us to conform to a script, a storyline, an aspect of an identity that we might not fit or belong to. And this sense of control and domination, that normativity brings, that this kind of empire brings as expectations, is so crucial to think about, because as the great Bell Hooks says of Kentucky, where there's domination, there cannot be love. And so when we look at norms and the norms we don't fit into as aspects of domination, as features of empire, I think we can then recognize, okay, how can we move towards love? Because anything dominative is not fitting there.
Yeah. So speaking of empire and domination, for a while there, felt like queerness as a concept, as a word, as a way of being was actually becoming more mainstream, at least in progressive spaces, the academy, like you mentioned. But we're now seeing a lot of pushback against the word queer, against the platforming of queer voices in Christian spaces. This goes along with the, calling DEI into question. It's as if the pendulum has swung back hard, and queer is again being seen as radical and even frightening or offensive. I'm imagining and hearing that a lot of queer people do not feel as safe to be as vocal about their experiences or advocates for themselves in certain spaces. This seems to me like a time when, allies need to step up, people in positions of power, editorial roles, for example, to make sure that we are creating those spaces where people feel safe. And it has come up recently where we've had to step up and take a stand that no, we're not going to go back to the way things were.
Yeah.
So if you could talk a little bit about that with your experience in publishing in particular.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, I was pitching a book about my travels to monasteries, and I was talking to a few folks about this. This book never panned out, but a part of my story, I was being very clear that part of my story is being a queer woman traveling to these monasteries. This is weird and unique. It's an interesting story, maybe. And this publisher wrote me back and said, I'm sorry, but this publishing house views LGBTQ voices as more of a liability than an asset. I hope in a few years it will be different, they wrote. And I wrote back at that time saying, thanks for reminding me that part of my story is non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And again, that was 10 years ago.
Amazing response, by the way.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you. I actually printed that email and I have it folded up like in a box. And
Yeah.
not my response, the response from them that I got. But
Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward 10 years, literally 2025. And I've been in conversation about, I'm working on my dissertation is a book essentially about queering mysticism. And I have been in conversation with several publishers, a couple of whom have basically said, yeah, we're starting to kind of sway away from
Take a step back.
from those voices, without like directly saying
Yeah.
it.
So at a time, when Queering Contemplation came out, it kind of felt like we were getting there.
Yeah.
And now it's only a year later, and I feel like that's a hard door slam.
Yeah.
To face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are we going to do?
This is a good question.
I mean, in some ways, it seems like we're starting over.
Yeah.
It can be so discouraging to think that queer voices are once again being silenced and marginalized and removed from the conversation in the church. And spaces where queer people might have just started to feel safe, welcome, seen, accepted. Now that all of that being called into question as to whether they belong there. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think there's also something there related to churches too, right? Because churches are being threatened, related to the stances they're taking, whether the being sanctuary spaces, but also some of the stances they're taking, and then the possibility of being stripped of their nonprofit statuses and these kinds of things. So I think there's all kinds of threats everywhere. And I think there's a twofold thing here. I think when it comes to queerness, when it comes to LGBTQ folks, I think allies need to recognize their own participation in this. But their participation in this is, I also believe, as I hope that we kind of shared today, that their own understanding of their own particularities, their own weirdness, their own experience of pushing up against norms. In other words, the way we're talking about queer, I'm talking about it in a way that it's kind of for everyone. And so I think the invitation is, how are we all queering spaces? How can we all queer spaces? How can you bring your own weird to, and I say weird in a positive way. I love weirdness. I love strangeness. It's one of my favorite things. But how can we all look and see differently? And how can we all show up for those on the margins? And I think sometimes that's simply showing up in our bodies.
As yourself.
As yourself.
Yeah, so tell this great story about running into your neighbors on your walk.
So the other day I was out for a walk, and I ran into a couple of my neighbors in my neighborhood who were these two men, probably in their 60s, and they were talking about asphalt and concrete, and and I thought, well, maybe there's a way I can jump in this conversation, and so I was kind of like, what's a fact I might know about one of these things? Well, as an Enneagram 5, it's really difficult to share not fact-checked information, but I tried. So I jumped in the conversation, and we got to continue to talk about asphalt and concrete. And eventually, I jumped in and I said, by the way, I'm Cassidy. I'm your neighbor. I live, around the block there. And one of them said, oh, you live by so-and-so. I said, no, and then they kept going, like, then you live by so-and-so. No. And then I tried. I was like, I live by so-and-so. And they're like, no. So this was not going well. And so finally, I just said, I'm the place with the rainbow flag. Because I'm the only rainbow flag on that block. And these two guys kind of like long pause. and one of them, so we pause, and I'm actually feeling fine, interestingly, but one of them looks at me and says, "Oh, you're one of them." And again, like, I was feeling fine. This could have gone so many directions, right?
Yeah, that's good.
And I laughed because he was kind of laughing. I started laughing. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm one of them." and then there was this other, even longer pause, and he said, "Thanks for being one of them."
Yeah. Like, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to
Yeah.
go at all.
No, it didn't.
This is such a touching story of Cassidy's neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, it was kind of like this instance of being othered, but it was also, you know, we tend to other things when someone doesn't like us or something about someone makes us uncomfortable. But it seemed like I watched someone move from othering me to being grateful for me, and it was a really beautiful thing to see.
That wouldn't have happened if you had backed away, which you might have done at one point in your life. And you might not have felt comfortable saying, "I'm the house with the rainbow flag." Yeah, I'm one of them. You wouldn't have had that opportunity. So
yeah, and that moment can be labor for some LGBTQ people, and that's not something that everyone should be doing. If someone feels safe in that situation, that's not for them to have that conversation. So I recognized, like, my privilege in feeling safe in that moment was a privilege. But yeah, it was a really unique thing to see. And so I think we should end on this idea of that we're all kind of invited to be ourselves, to find our sacred weird, and to show up with that. You know, when we aren't fully ourselves, we not only see less of one another, but as we've been saying, we see less of God.
yes.
And that gift comes from LGBTQ people. It comes from all of us in this room, because all of us have had to push up against norms and expectations and storylines that were given to us.
And when you do it, you make it a little bit safer, right? For someone else to do it.
Yeah.
So those incremental steps.
Yeah. So we're going to conclude with this quote from Alan Watts. And this is our little encouragement to be your own sacred weird. "I've always done things in my own way, which is at once the way that comes naturally to me, that is honest, sincere, genuine, and unforced, but also perverse. Although you must remember that this word means per, through, verse, poetry. Out of the way and wayward, which is surely towards the way, and that to be queer, to follow your own weird, is wholeheartedly to accept your karma or fate or destiny, and thus to be odd in the service of God, whose service, as Anglican Book of Common Prayer declares, is perfect freedom." Thank you.
Thank you so much for the dialogue and the invitation to be our authentic selves. I think that is an invitation that we all need to accept and hopefully be able to live into. So I'd like to invite us at this time, if we have any questions, let's take some time. And they've agreed to hang out for a little while. And so there are microphones in various parts of the room. There's one in the back, there's one in the middle here. If you have a question, and there's also one over on the other side here. So if you have a question, please go to the mic and ask your question. So,
Also, I encourage you to take the magazines that are on the tables, and I have an extra one here. Cassidy has an interview in this issue with theologian Lisa Isherwood that covers some of the same things we talked about today. This idea of widening the incarnation through queering. It's a great interview, so please take it.
Yeah.
all right, thank you. So questions, anyone, please go to the mic. There is no thinking happening, no questions.
Okay, here we go.
And feel free to ask
All right,
Any
Gavin,
questions?
please.
ask any questions.
Off topic,
And say
whatever.
your name as well.
There we go. Hey, my name's Gavin. So just a question, when you did put your 30 days notice in, obviously that's a, that's a big jump. And, there must be a lot of you're not like sure what the next move is. What kept you going in that period of transition?
In the 30-day period or once I was traveling?
Once you were traveling.
Yeah. That's a great question because I can't tell you how many walks I went on at monasteries where I just kind of said, what the hell am I doing with my life? But every time I did that, and this is what I found in contemplative spirituality, there was a knowing in the unknowing. There was a piece of just surrender, maybe surrender to this strange journey. But I was also advised along the way. I met with a monk before I left, and at a monastery in Iowa, and he really encouraged me to make sure I have guides along the way, whether it's a spiritual director, whether it's a consistent friend I'm checking in with, because it's that was a lot of silence and a lot of time alone and a lot of solitary reflection. And so that can get dangerous, right? And especially, as someone who navigates mental health stuff, related to my anxiety, it was really important for me to do that and to make sure I did have that safety in place. But ultimately, if I'm honest with you, it was scary. It was scary, but I knew it was the right thing. And I just had to keep trusting it. And yeah, I wish I had a better response for you, but yeah, thanks for that question.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Justice. This is a question that's been on my mind and probably lots of our minds throughout this week. I have a short story. In high school, I'm in this really sweet church lady's van. We're talking about theology. She's in her 60s. I'm like 15. And she's talking about her real privileged life, how she grew up, whatever. And this was before I had come out to myself, mind you.
Yeah.
I said, hey, do you think being gay is a sin? And she does a long pause. She says, well, it's no worse than murder. It's no worse than adultery or murder. All sin, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. As people, and you're a reverend, as people who encounter these people, these beloved children of God, I want to text this lady almost every day and be like,
Yeah.
Can we please chat? After she said that, there was this long pause, and I was like, what do we do in that pause? How do we manage that?
That's a beautiful question. And what do we do in that pause in terms of to respond or to?
Anything, like how do you cope, how do you go to bed at night and be like, okay, that's what some people think?
Yeah, how have you've gotten this question before. You've had this conversation, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I just totally refused to engage with any conversation that talks about any kind of sexuality as a sin. And so what I say is I begin with beloved belonging for all people. And so I don't engage with that, and I think that's the work of allies, is to keep bridging that gap, to keep bringing people along, because we should not be engaging in those conversations because they still cause harm to us.
It's so harmful.
It's so harmful. I mean,
defending your own personhood.
Right. For your personhood to be named as a sin is just, it's harmful. It's theologically unsound. It's bad theology. And it's, you know, as we know, this bad theology, particularly on this issue, can kill people. It can cause people deep harm. And so I think in that pause, in that pause for younger you, I think we have to make it about ourselves and you know, do that self-nurturing, that
self-protection.
That self-protection, right? Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay, I have an online question.
Yeah.
Sorry. From John in Pittsburgh. Hey, John.
Hey, John.
On the Queering Contemplation podcast, you routinely ask your guests what queerness means to them. Have any of the answers stuck with you? And is there an insight you'd like to share with us from one of those conversations?
That's a great question. Okay, I'm thinking of one where I talked with Mihi Kim Court, who wrote Outside the Lines. And at one point in the conversation, she says, queerness is magic. And that really stuck with me because, again, because of the expansiveness of it, but also the ways in which it evoked kind of my own imagination about the possibilities. And another one I'm thinking about is, I believe it was Alicia Crosby Mack, and she talked about how queerness subverts things that harm us. And those two things, I love the juxtaposition of those two, like magic and subversion.
It's the trickster again.
It's the trickster, and it's the way queerness holds so much. And one thing that comes up a lot is, you know, we talk about queerness in so many different ways. I think some people kind of say, well, it just sounds like everything, or is it nothing? And I always like to say queerness is everything, but it's everything loving, liberative, justice-seeking. And I think that's always a helpful frame for me, because I think when we talk about it in so many different ways, it can feel like we're flailing with the word, but actually it's a very tight word when we think about it as things that are seeking justice, as things that are liberative, as things that are loving.
Working for the good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had one question for you. So we have some of our seminary students that are just starting. Right?
Yeah.
So they just got here. Woo! And so just kind of wondering if you had any advice for them as they travel through seminary. Some are preparing to be marriage and family therapists. Some are preparing for pastoral ministry, chaplains. There's so many things they're kind of looking forward to. So do you have any advice, especially as regards to being queer in the world, for them as they go on their journey?
Yeah, thank you. I miss seminary, if I'm honest with you. Some of my best lifelong questions and conversations came from seminary, and they came from the moments between, the time periods right after class, or that break during class, or and I have lifelong friends from seminary. So I think my advice would be to, well, in the queerness sense, to stay weird and to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And in another sense, it would be to ask the questions and know that whatever you ask, someone else in the room is also either wondering that or curious about that. And it's a huge gift to show up with questions. Your questions are not of the devil. And pushing up, you know, I had a lot of friends whose faith was really strengthened through seminary, but strengthened because they were willing to ask the hard questions about their own faith. And I think that that's, just go there. Go to the places that you're not sure you want to go. Question the things you're learning. Question the things you're reading. There's all of my seminary professors and all of your seminary professors are ready to engage with you in these conversations. It's a place for conversation, it's a place for growth, and it's a place where everybody gets to join together on those things and that journey. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have at least maybe one more question? B? Two online? B, did you have one? Sage, did you have a question? You asked me a question.
Oh.
Okay. There are a couple online? Yeah.
All right. Steve, I don't know where Steve is, but Steve asks, can you speak more to what allies can do to be supportive advocates and or public witnesses?
Yeah.
I like that phrase, public witness.
Yeah. I think first of all, I would say this. Don't underestimate the value of wearing a rainbow sticker or having a rainbow flag. Don't underestimate that, but also don't overestimate that because there's a hell of a lot more you can be doing.
Yeah.
And seeing that really can be a gift to someone. I was recently on the BYU campus in Utah, and a handful of folks still had these rainbow stickers on them, on their name badges that worked there, and that was something that I think they were trying to get rid of. And I thought, wow, like that could make one student feel safe.
Yeah.
And then I think about, what was your name? Justice? I think about Justice's question about the woman in the minivan.
Yep.
And I think, allyships means someone else having that conversation with that woman, not Justice.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many ways that we can show up. There's obvious ways, when we think about right now, protests or going to our state houses when these bills are being brought to light. And I think particularly as faith leaders, whether or not you're ordained, you're involved in a seminary, you are a faith leader. And that is a role that people respect and revere. And taking that presence to places and speaking from that voice is really, really a gift to LGBTQ folks. Because again, not all of us feel safe to do that. And to be honest with you, it's getting less safe.
Yeah.
Which is scary. And so we need allies more than ever to be stepping up to take on some of those roles in which LGBTQ people are feeling less safe to show up.
Yeah.
One more question online?
Steve is from Syracuse, and he's an alum. Thanks, Steve. A question from Nishan from here in Louisville. She's one of our students.
Oh, cool.
She says, good evening. Thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Then she quotes, queer is the way I turn my head to look at the world. I'm going to try to do this justice. Ma'am, I love this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't do the Nishan quite well, but y'all know. In the spirit of Merton's concepts of inner awareness and honoring the true self, please share your thoughts on queering our response to the current challenges to public safety. How might queer folks and all of us address our realities today as our full selves in support of ourselves and our neighbors?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nishan.
Yeah. I think one thing I will often say to people is find your pocket of safety as queer people. Like if you find your community, your pocket of safety where you feel safe, where you feel welcome, where you know you are protected and loved and taken care of. That could be a church space, that could be chosen family, that could be your seminary professors, that could be all kinds of places. And hopefully you have multiple pockets where you feel that belonging and where you feel that freedom to be your full self. Because that's true. Not all queer people still feel safe to be their full selves in every aspect of their lives. Some people are closeted in particular aspects of their life for their own safety. And that is something that we obviously would like to create a better world where that doesn't have to exist. But yeah, I think finding those pockets of safety is crucial. I don't know. What else would I say to that? Any ideas? It was a tough question.
I think we open it up to the floor.
Any
I think we
thoughts
need,
on that
I
out
think
there?
we need more ideas.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that out there?
One thought? No thoughts? No? Okay, I think there's thinking.
There's thinking happening, I
All
can
right.
tell.
Let's give you the last word if you would.
Yeah.
Well, she said no. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it.
Okay. All right.
Wonderful.
He wants to go.
I feel like my question did kind of get asked with that, but I was gonna specify more about like small practices, like especially spiritually, like for people who are in unsafe spaces, small ways, little practices, anything that we can do for ourselves, or like whoever who is unsafe, to be ourselves.
Yeah.
And then I think also opening the floor, when you said opening the floor, I had a thought about like as a librarian, I always push like find media, find books, find anything that you relate yourself in, because I mean personally that's how I got to a place where I was confident enough to be myself.
Yeah.
So that's my little piece.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's thank Reverend Hall and Jessica Mesman. Thank you so much.